Hi guys, it's Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now today we're speaking to Dr. Stephanie Schuttler from the world of fancy scientist. Now Stephanie, she's an unconventional wildlife biologist. She's an entrepreneur and a careers advisor who has spent nearly 2 decades studying wildlife from all over the world. She's also author of Getting a Job in Wildlife Biology, What It's Like and What You Need to Know. And in this podcast, we explore what it's like to be a wildlife biologist. And we also discuss her top tips for getting started in your career in wildlife biology. So without further ado, let's dive in. Enjoy. Okay, well, welcome, Stephanie. Thank you for coming on the Conservation Careers podcast. Now, you're from the world of fancy scientist, and I love your site. I love your advice. I love your emails and everything that you share. Let's start at the top. Could you introduce yourself and just tell us what is a fancy scientist?
Sure. So a fancy scientist is a nickname that I developed, and I've kind of applied it to other people. But how it started is that I specifically am in the field of wildlife biology, where people are not fancy at all. And I come from, I guess, a background of being fancy. My mom just always dressed up. I mean, she wasn't like crazy, but she always would wear red lipstick, even when she went to the grocery store and stuff. And I just really like stereotypically girly things like fashion and makeup and stuff. And I've always expressed myself that way. Then when I went to graduate school, being around all these people who were in the ecology, conservation biology department, they just don't dress up and don't wear makeup. So I felt like I stuck out for a while. And I actually did kind of tamper down a little bit and wore less makeup and didn't wear as colorful clothes or fancy clothes. And I just didn't feel like myself. And I thought that people would think that I was stupid or not take the career seriously if I dressed up. So that's why I tampered down. And I actually did not find that to be true. It was a lot of it was in my head. So then I kind of embraced my fancy side more. And when I started my job at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, I really embraced it there because we were on display. We worked in a lab with glass walls, so you could see the scientists. And I wanted to show to the public that scientists can look like this. Like, people don't expect me to be a scientist. And we worked with, this is a very long answer, but we worked with teachers on the program that I worked in. We involved teachers in our research, and they just kept saying how fancy I was. So then that's how the name took place. That's how it evolved. And I just really liked the sound of it. And now I do a feature, Fancy Scientist, every Friday. It's open to all genders. And you don't even have to be that fancy. It's just more stylish scientists. But it's a way for people to see what other scientists look like. And it works. Like, my dad will write to me and he'll be like, I can't believe that person's a scientist. They just don't fit that stereotype of what we think a scientist looks like.
I think here in the UK, it typically would be white male, grey beard, open-toed sandals, that sort of thing, and you're completely going the other direction, which is wonderful. Yeah,
right.
Embracing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what's your day job? Just give us an idea of what you do day in, day out. How do you describe your work?
Well, it's changed a lot. So I come from an academic trajectory. So I guess I graduated from undergrad in 2003, and I had 3 internships, and then I did my PhD. After my PhD, I had a long postdoc for about 5 years. So only a year I've been in my new position. So before, I was mostly conducting research, which involved really writing scientific papers a lot and analyzing data. We worked with citizen scientists on our project. So they actually set the camera traps out. That was what our project was on, was photographing mammals was our focus. So we got the camera images and I would have to expert review them, make sure that they're identifying them correctly. But really just a lot of my job, like people think that we're out in the woods all the time. And in graduate school, you do collect your own data. And in my internships, I was a little bit more. But yeah, I'm mostly when I was doing research, I'm mostly at my desk writing papers, writing grants, analyzing data. And now I've transitioned my career again to be mostly at my desk, but I just realized from my postdoc experience especially that, and I know this sounds silly, but so much of conservation work is really about humans. Like people always think like, oh, I want to do conservation research, I want to, work with this species, I want to save the tiger, and they imagine themselves like going out there and researching the tiger. And we do need that science, it's super important, but for so many species, if we just alleviate the human pressures, they bounce back and they do fine. And in my PhD work on forest elephants, that was really apparent to me because they've suffered massive declines just in the past 2 decades. I think it was 70% or 60% declines.
Mm.
And here I was studying the social structure of forest elephants, which was super cool. And I loved doing it. And it could have conservation implications, but really you just need the poaching to stop. So I kind of honestly felt guilty a little bit studying them, and even continuing to ask for money when really they need rangers on the ground to stop the poaching, which is not interesting scientifically. People are not going to fund projects like that from a science standpoint. So yeah, I wanted to reach more people, and I worked with kids. I realized also that these connections with nature are really what's important for people to become conservationists. If you try to reach adults, it's hard. They're not as likely to change their values or their attitudes, although you should keep trying. I definitely think you should keep trying, but kids are more receptive. And that's how I became a wildlife biologist. And all my friends, we all spent time in nature, and we had, like, I remember catching frogs with my friends and my family. We would always let them go, though. I like to tell people we would let them go. And just like looking at these animals up close. And that's why I cared about animals and the environment so much. So now I work on education. I have a website for conservation education, wildlife research, so people can learn about nature and wildlife. And I am launching a kids program this spring that is going to be designed, getting kids outside to nature and having them learn about wildlife by doing real science-based activities that wildlife biologists do. And then my blog also talks a lot about careers in wildlife biology, because as you, with similar background with you, as people were asking me questions about that, and my blog posts on advice for wildlife biologists were really my top posts, because it's the information out there it's either it's really not out there, or it's written by people who aren't wildlife biologists, like it's written by like a career page. So it's really difficult to find this information, as you know.
Yeah, I totally reflect that and feel that too. Yeah, that's kind of why we started Conservation Careers, was there was just a lack of specific careers advice within this sector. It was often from people outside the sector trying to sort of transpose it in and advise it in. And I think you need to have lived it and understood it to really be able to help and advise others and give that effective support that you do so well. So wildlife biologist, I just want to unpick that a little bit. What does a wildlife biologist mean? What does it do? Maybe could you describe a little bit like what your PhD was like? What was it? What were you trying to study? What was it like being in the field? What were the struggles? What did you enjoy? Just sort of paints the picture of doing a study like that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I could call myself a bunch of different things. I actually struggled with what to call myself.
Well, what could you call yourself? What are those?
Any ecologist. Actually, my degree was in biological sciences, and I was in the ecology, evolution, and behavior subsection are animal behaviorist, zoologist. But really why I like the term wildlife biologist, and this includes my mammal work. So I feel like this encompasses me better, but really wildlife biology is dealing with or studying wildlife in their natural habitats.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a zoologist, you can study lemurs at the Lemur Center here in Duke and understand their intelligence and cognition. But wildlife biology is more, and it's focused on wildlife, whereas ecology, you can study ecosystems and or just plants. So that's why I like the term wildlife biologist. So in graduate school, people think graduate school is a lot of courses. They imagine it to be like undergrad, but it's not like that at all. Like people, even like your professors, don't care that much about the courses, and they're more like discussion based. But yeah, that was the first time I led my own project. So I had to come up with the idea, come up with the questions. That actually is a big part of being a scientist. Is what question are you going to ask that's interesting and new, and it has to contribute to scientific theory too. So it's not just like, for forest elephants, they're actually not studied that well at all. So there's a lot we just like don't know about them, and it's hard to ask those basic questions. You won't get, at least in the United States, you won't get degrees for asking those basic questions. You really need to have like a scientific theory attached to it.
So what was your approach to that then? You knew your subject matter was forest elephants, and you chose that yourself, did you?
Yeah. So my advisor, she studied she used genetics, non-invasive genetics, to study animals.
I see.
And she was a new professor. So honestly, I could study really whatever I wanted as long as it involved genetics and as long as we could get funding for it. So she had done work on forest elephants using genetics to estimate populations. So she using their dung. So her research was all about comparing that to the traditional surveys and how this could be applied to other animals. So I did, and I always loved elephants. When I did a study abroad program in Kenya, and I loved elephants. And just the fact that they weren't that well studied intrigued me. And I loved the savanna elephants in Kenya because they have these really cool social systems where they have these family groups, and then they aggregate into these larger family groups. It's all based on their relationships with each other, their inheritance, as the seasons change, and they can communicate with each other through infrasounds, these sounds that go below our level of hearing, and they join up together. They have these fission fusion societies. That's what it's called. So in forest elephants, when you see them in the wild, you really only see just like one elephant. You'll see a female elephant with her calves. And that's not really a group, because the calves, they have to stay with the mom. They're dependent on her. But I thought, maybe when you see these elephants, there's really other elephants around, but you can't see them because of the forest environment. So how you observe forest elephants is in these natural clearings called bys, and they're just like these big open spots in the forest, but they're surrounded by forest. So it's possible that one elephant is in the by and the rest of the group is just on the outskirts and you can't see them. Or savanna habitats within forest range, and that's where I did my research. I studied them in Lope National Park, where they have maintained some savannas, and they burn them and everything. So you can see the elephants in those savannas.
And your questions were around how these groups are formed, how they may differ in forests, how they communicate. What were you trying to unpick?
I was trying to unpick basically their social structure. So are we really seeing these small groups? Or are these more extended families? And then are what are the relationships? Are they based on genetic relationships? And the conservation implication is that for savanna elephants, these groups are really important for their survival, because the oldest elephant, the matriarch, she has a lot of knowledge, and during times of drought, she can lead the group to important water sources. And there's studies to show that elephants with older matriarchs in their group do better with predator defense than the younger ones. And they're being poached because of their tusks for ivories. And the as elephants grow, their tusks grow, so the older individuals have larger tusks. So in savanna elephants, where they're being poached, you get these groups of unrelated individuals trying to make it work together. So I was mostly interested in, how their social structure was formed and how it differed from savanna elephants, and what is causing those effects. So I wasn't able to test what specifically caused it, but we did find smaller groups overall. We used a network model approach, so we were able to. I tracked individuals and looked at who they were connected to over time and space, and we did find bigger groups than normal, or that's normally seen just in the field. But it still wasn't as connected as savanna elephants were.
Right. Okay. And how do you physically track? How did you observe them? Just to kind of round things off for us. It sounds so easy, but I'm sure it's really difficult, right? Did you follow them? Did you radio track them? Did you have camera traps? What were you doing?
Camera traps actually would be good in the future, but I worked in a park with savannas, and I really drove around the park looking for elephants. So the elephants, they weren't necessarily too hard to see depending on the savanna. Some of the grasses were really high and they could be hard to see, but a lot of them are skittish in this park, and they would run away when you stop the car. Right. So basically, whenever I saw a group, I would take as many pictures as possible to identify those elephants. And normally you can identify them by their ear tears, but forest elephants don't really get as many ear tears, and they have maybe really little ones that are hard to see. So it was a combination of looking at their ears, and including their ear vein patterns, which was unique, and matching up their tusk shape and length and tail brush. Wow. So yeah, basically driving around the park, and then after we saw groups, we would come back and try to collect dung from them. But it's almost impossible to track elephants in the forest, and really dangerous too. Well, depending on the park, our park was dangerous.
Dangerous because of the people that are in there, or the animals that you might come across, or?
So in general, I would say people can be dangerous. But in our park, people weren't really a problem. It was definitely the elephants. They're just this park and another park is notorious for having aggressive elephants. And I'm not sure completely why, because forest elephants are poached throughout. So I personally think maybe in this park they'd been poached badly in the past, but because there's research done there now, maybe they feel more protected and they can like stand up for themselves, but they still don't like people. But yeah, they will charge you and you'll have to run away from them.
Sounds like going to be a good runner. It sounds like lots of fun though, to be honest, driving around looking for elephants, analyzing their behavior, collecting dung, it sounds good. Yeah.
Like people think I had this really tough field work because I was in Africa, and it was like, actually going to the swamps and collecting dung was challenging, but it's not like I was like walking on my feet for like 14-hour days.
Right. Yeah. So our backgrounds are similar in that way too, in that I studied barn owls for 5-6 years, something like that at uni, for a PhD also. And for me, that meant getting up really early in the morning, because they're crepuscular, so they're active at dawn and dusk. So I'll be up about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning in the summer, observing them through till, 8, 9 o'clock, something like that. And then again in the evening around dusk time, 7, 8, 9, 10 until like 11. So a very short burst of sleep, and then go out and do it. Whereas friends of mine were studying things like butterflies, or dragonflies, which are the best things in the world to study because they're only active in the mid-afternoon on nice warm days that aren't too aren't too windy.
It is nice to study.
So it's like, gosh, it really gets you thinking, like, what is the best species to be studying just from the kind of observer's perspective? Because there's some really tough ones out there.
Yeah, and I found out why people don't study forest elephants because it's really hard. It's
Hard work, yeah.
from all different approaches, and even like I mentioned, camera traps. That's probably the best next step. And there are people camera trapping them, but elephants are destructive, so a lot of times they'll break camera traps, and just getting enough access, like to sample Lopay National Park really well, it would be extremely difficult. You would have to have multiple camping trips, honestly, probably for months long because it's such a large park. So we were only able to work in like this small section. So to be able to set up camera traps throughout the park, yeah, it's intense. It's tough.
Yeah. And I guess that sort of links to something else nowadays within sort of wildlife biology and ecology more general. It's just the impact of technology and how things are changing quite rapidly nowadays. What we can do in terms of, well, we have drones, we have, great satellite imagery too. There's great radio tracking technology too. You could place these, satellite tags on animals and watch them remotely, as they move and track. And, that's really got to be opening up opportunities for scientists to kind of answer questions better.
Yeah, I actually really encourage people who are interested in this field to get a solid background in statistics and computer science because I've even seen it change when I started my PhD in 2006 until when I graduated. Back then, people were just starting to learn R, which is a stats program. And now, like, you really need to be proficient in it for this career. And like you were saying, these trackers, back when they first started, you would go out in the field and collect these data points, and you would maybe have hundreds of data points per animal. And now you can get them like seconds apart, and the trackers last for years. So you have like millions of data points. And same thing with camera traps. And with citizen science, like iNaturalist, there's like, these photos all over the place. So really the challenge of wildlife biologists in the future is making sense of all of the data. So it's really a statistics issue, but you need a biology mindset to do that. If you're too statistics oriented, then you forget about the animal's biology, which can be important or is important in analyzing the data.
Yes, it's having those two sides to it, understanding the animal and the biology and what's going on and the behavior, and then understanding how you're going to make sense of these huge volumes and data sets which we're producing nowadays. I guess, we used to be sort of data poor, and now we're absolutely overwhelmed data rich.
Right? No, it's totally that. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Have you got any other advice for people that are thinking about possibly a career around sort of wildlife biology? So understanding R and stats, finding a study species and being able to observe it. What other things should people bear in mind that might get them onto that track?
I mean, my biggest tip is always to look at the job markets right now and to figure out ultimately what they want to do as much as they can, because when I went through, I was always just like, oh, I'll figure it out. Like I can work for the government or I can work for a nonprofit. I knew I liked research and I knew I liked outreach. But as I was going through my career or when I was on the job market, I didn't realize how competitive it was out there, and nobody really warned me for that. So I figured that because I had a PhD and because I studied a mammal, that I could apply for, like a state mammalogist job here for our government. And I didn't even get an interview for that job. And so you need to think about things like, the ultimate job that you want, because they require different qualifications. So one of the reasons why I know I wasn't interviewed was because I had a PhD. So while I loved my experience in Gabon, it really only set me up for jobs in Africa or Asia working on elephants. And I did not want to live permanently abroad, or an academic track, being a professor. And I never wanted to be a professor either. It's a lot of work. It's a very stressful life. Or not that I'm scared of work, but it's very, very stressful and demanding. and yeah, just not the kind of atmosphere that I wanted. Or zoo jobs. And there are some really cool zoo research positions out there, but they're few and far between.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they don't pop up that much, and you'd have to be willing to go anywhere in the country for those jobs. So yeah, I recommend. I actually have this tool on my website called the Job Tracker. It's just a way for people to organize their jobs, but I write down these different categories for people to think about, like when they should put down any job that they're interested in, and then the categories, and then that can help them understand what they need to get that job.
Got you. Yeah. Yeah. And we have a similar system too, actually, on our
Yeah.
side. Yeah. Review, find your niche, which in itself is quite a big challenge and big interesting to talk that through a bit as well. Then having found your niche, it's about analyzing the jobs in that niche that really closely match what you're looking for. And then from that really gives you a clear idea as to what employers want, and you can then identify your gaps and start to try and fill them. Yeah.
And also, just like I said, like how available the jobs are, like because this is not a lucrative career. And I always knew I wasn't going to make a lot of money. But I mean, some of these jobs really make it more difficult for you to live. They just don't pay that high. And if you want to own a home or have kids or travel, I mean, these are just some of the things that you need to think about going into this career. And like I said, if you can even get the job, I don't ever deter people from going for the job that they really want, but I think that they should know if they want to be, like the curator of mammalogy at a museum, that's a niche job that comes up maybe, I don't know, twice a year or once a year. So they need to be prepared for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And sort of the abundance of those jobs. What advice do you give people in terms of just trying to find the right job for them, find their niche? We talked about, once you've found it, what you might need to do to secure that job and maybe what steps might be needed in between. But how do you help people through kind of, self-discovery and understanding their options and sort of processing them?
That's a good question. I would encourage people, to learn about the jobs as much as they can, because a lot of times what they think a job is like isn't really what it's like. Like for me, like if you told me years ago, once you get a PhD, most of your jobs are going to be in the office, writing grants, writing manuscripts, like I wouldn't have known that. So get a good sense of like what the job is like. And yeah, I mean, I have, so I encourage people to like take assessments of themselves, what they like to do, looking at past work experiences, looking at their hobbies. But I would encourage people to just try things out too. I know. So one way is volunteering. You can apply for specific positions, or you can volunteer on your own. I like even in our field, entry level volunteer positions that aren't paid can be competitive. So people like can't even get anything. So I encourage them to either like look for somebody who they're interested in working with and asking them if they could help them out with their research, or join a citizen science project and really see if you like doing that. There's a lot of really great ones out there. There's a lot that you can just do on your own. So if you're interested in being an ornithologist, join eBird and do surveys every day and see if you like doing that. And see if you can reach out to somebody who has a job as an ornithologist, and then ask them what they do on a daily basis, and get as much information as you can about the job and yourself too.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Yeah, and that's something again we share through Conservation Careers. Different people's stories, just like yours that we're doing today. And in 7 years of doing so, we haven't had a single person say no. And why I say that is I think this is a friendly space to be in. Conservation and wildlife and ecology. And I think if you reach out to someone and you want to know a bit more about their career, what it's like to do their job, and just have a quick informal chat, you might be surprised that quite a lot of people are very open to that. And it's almost quite flattering to be asked. So don't worry, and particularly if you feel like you're an imposter coming from the outside, which is quite common, I think, within our sphere. Don't try to overcome that. Just reach out, find people, and LinkedIn's a great place to be kind of searching for people's contacts and names and figuring out what different people are doing. So yeah, great advice.
Yeah, I just tell people to just send them. I mean, you want to do a little bit of research so you know what they do, but I encourage them to send a quick, short email. and just ask them for 15 minutes of their time. One of my students did this before I gave this advice. She just reached out to, she wants to be a herpetology curator. She reached out to the curator of our museum, and I think she just asked him like a couple of questions, but he invited her to come to the museum and tour the collections. And she got an internship out of it. And she didn't even ask for that specifically. So, yeah, like you said, most people are nice. The worst, honestly, that's going to happen to you is people are just going to delete your email. Or it gets buried. And I do tell people to follow up, because that happens to me too. Like, I'm interested in something, but it gets buried. And then they send a reminder. I'm like, oh yeah, like I was interested in that. Thank you for reminding me. So don't be afraid to follow up too.
Yeah, that's good advice. And it does, as you say, like, an interview, a discussion, a connection could lead to something else, a volunteering internship or more. Yeah. Yeah, something we touched on a second ago, actually, was around imposter syndrome. And I know it's something we've discussed also previously last week when we were chatting. And it's something that I think is quite common within our fields. Something that we see, I think, particularly from those who are coming from outside the industry. So whether you're we call them career switchers, you're doing something unrelated to wildlife conservation, but your passion, is very much within the sector, and you want to kind of transfer in. You might not even know what your opportunities might be like, or how you might make that transfer, and you feel like you're surrounded by experts and people that know much more than you. Whereas often actually your background expertise is sought after, and you have better training actually sometimes outside than inside the industry. Is imposter syndrome something you see in people also? And if so, like what sort of advice might you give to people? How can people get over that?
I have a whole blog post with tips and a YouTube series, tips on imposter syndrome. So it was huge for me. I personally think almost everyone experience it. It has to be like 99 point something percent in our field. Right. And when I became a postdoc, it's really funny because like the graduate students confided in me more because I think they could like reveal their secrets to me because I wasn't their advisor, but I understood what they were going through. Yeah. And some students that were like incredibly smart, like knew so much, were great with data analysis, were like still insecure about their skills and if their advisor thought they were doing a good job. So I suffered from it in graduate school. It held me back a lot during seminars and classes. I was afraid to ask questions. I was afraid it was a question that I should have known, or maybe like I wasn't paying close enough attention in the seminar and they said something I missed. But I guess the biggest piece of advice that I have to get, especially for school, is to really own your experience and to own your I say stupidity, which just sounds bad, but I mean, especially when you're in school, you're there to learn. So if you don't know something, it's okay. And just like, who cares what anyone else thinks? You're going to let somebody else's opinion of what they think about you affect your ability to learn. And when you miss out on those opportunities, it can affect you later on down in life. So for example, one time during a class, one of our professors was like, do you guys know generalized linear models? And he's like, you guys probably know that, or do you want me to go over it? And I should have raised my hand and said, can you go over it? Because I didn't have a solid statistics background. And I didn't. So that stunted me because I didn't. I had to like learn it on my own. And I guarantee there's other students who feel the same way too, who have the same questions as you, and who feel the same way as you. But yeah, I encourage them to just reclaim their experience and to just really not care what other people think.
Yeah, I feel that too. Yeah, and I think also that the academic sector, if you can put it that way, universities and institutions, the main currency there feels like it's sort of knowledge and expertise.
Yes.
And that can fuel in some people egos, which can be, if you're not an incredibly confident person, which most of us are not, that can be quite intimidating and quite daunting. And actually, So finding ways to overcome that, is hard. I mean, if you give a talk in an academic sector, then you're expecting tough questions, and the audience are really trying to kind of pick you apart and unpick your logic. And that's all about maintaining scientific standards, making sure that, your assumptions are correct and your results, are validated and so on and so forth. But it makes for a very kind of harsh environment to work within potentially. But on reflection, I think more generally across the sector, across the conservation sector, it's not normally like that. And actually, if you get outside of academia, which we've both done, it's largely a friendly, happy place to be, actually. And people are encouraging, people are supportive, people are helpful. I'm not saying that doesn't happen within academia. Of course it does. But it's a different pressure cooker, different type of environment.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree with you. It's a different culture.
Mm.
And I guess, I mean, the advice I tell people, like, so you're like, when you're giving those seminars in front of your peers and your professors at your university, and they are like picking apart your talk, I just would always look at it, they're making you better. And again, that's your learning experience. Like, of course you're going to make mistakes. Of course you're going to do things wrong. You're a student, you're in school, you're here to learn, and it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree. Yeah. How did you find the transition from like academia outside? Because that can be a big move. I think academia. Sorry, yeah, go on.
No, go ahead. I mean, I personally love it, and I think I had more of a slow transition because I worked at a museum where we really prioritized outreach. That was huge. And my project involved teachers too. So literally all of my data came, or most of it, I had some other different projects, but I worked with teachers. They set up the camera traps and the kids would take care of the data, upload it and everything. So I think, yeah, because I worked in a museum, and even in the museum, I mostly engaged with academics, with our lab, which was all scientists, because we were in our bubble, our literal fishbowl bubble.
Not COVID bubble, people.
Oh yeah, they got COVID, but and I think also because my advisor loves science communication, so he really embraced it. So that helped me a lot as well. And when you become a good science communicator, you have to learn how to not use words like jargon, or use jargon words, and make things like easier to read, like make charts easier to read. Like at the museum, when I gave one presentation, my first presentation, I had, I think, a graph in it, and like a basic simple graph. And the person in charge of the Daily Planet was like, you have to take that out, or like really simplify it, or really explain it, because most people can't read graphs who come in. They just, it's above them. So, and even my boss would encourage us, like, instead of putting a graph, can you explain it in pictures and just with arrows and trends? And so that made it a lot easier. And I think that's what I'm good at too, is like, I never liked jargon. So I think I'm good at just like explaining what it is to, I say, normal people. I have a lot of normal friends.
Non-fancies. Yeah. It's a vital skill as well that everyone should cultivate, but particularly academics, when it's almost a language in itself. And a piece of advice someone gave me actually years ago, which was, can you explain your work to your grandma? Can you explain it to someone who's really removed from it but wants to understand and is really interested? If you can do that and use simple, clear language. I mean, if you ever watch any David Attenborough whatsoever, he's not dumbing down at all. He's teaching really interesting stuff, but communicating it so clearly and so simply that you access and understand it and you want to know more. So,
he explains evolution and sexual selection so at the museum, you could have somebody walk in who's 2 years old. You could have somebody who walks in, and like, some people ask me really intelligent questions, in-depth questions about elephants. And then other people, ask me, how much does an elephant eat in a day and stuff like that. So you have to hit all those audiences. But yeah, I just really love doing that. And, I do have research I'm finishing up too. So I do have manuscripts I'm still working on. So I am still doing a little bit of science, and I'm still involved in EMAM a little bit in Wildlife Insights, which is this large camera trapping um, initiative to
Yeah.
basically amass all of, like, really, we want to get all the camera trap images like from everywhere and have them in a central database so people
Wow.
can do those large scale analyses of animals.
Wow. That sounds great. Yeah. I was going to actually ask what next for you, like what next, but maybe you've already started to answer that a little bit. Where do you hope you'll be, I don't know, 5, 10 years from now? Have you got directions and ambitions, or are you just taking things one step at a time?
I guess kind of both. So next is really the nature program, and I have to figure out what I need to call it because I keep on saying like a nature program, which doesn't sound very exciting. But I really want to take that far because, like I said, I really care about creating these connections with kids in nature, so we can raise future conservationists. Also, I mentioned as adults aren't as receptive, but if the information's coming from their kids, they're more likely to be receptive.
Yeah.
So getting the kids and parents involved with that. So I really want to grow and have a large membership with that. I love doing things like YouTube videos, so keep doing that. Ideally, if I become um, big enough financially, I would love to hire people to film me and do all my video editing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And travel to different places and make fun videos. I love doing stuff like that. But yeah, really, I like for the next 5 years, I really want to focus on this nature project and just really educating people about wildlife and conservation. Yeah, and conservation too. And I don't just talk about research. I talk about like eco-friendly tips that anyone can use. That doesn't
Mhm.
even.
Yeah,
Um,
you talk about different products you can use that
yeah.
are also environment sustainability more generally, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as it's fancy.
It
Right.
it doesn't have to be fancy.
No, no,
I
I'm
just like to defy. It's funny because I'm actually like not fancy in a lot of ways at home. Like when I, since COVID especially, I mean, already was working from home, but now COVID, it's like if I don't do something like this, I don't dress up, I don't put makeup on, I'm wearing old clothes with holes in them. I have cat hair all over me.
Amen for podcasts. Um, just to finish up, then we normally ask people like a couple of fairly open, kind of bigger questions, just to kind
Uh-huh.
of hear about, how you think and what's important to you, and it'd be really interesting to kind of hear your answers on them as well. One is like, if I could make you a czar for the day, no, maybe if I could make you US president, let's push Biden aside. We make you president for a day, and you can enact any law whatsoever. You can
Oh
change
my gosh.
anything you'd like to do to help this planet that we're living within. What sort of what law might you click your fingers and make happen?
That's a really good question. I mean, I don't have anything specific, like a specific law, but whatever would have the biggest impact on climate change, I have to say. So in the US, it would be definitely, targeting like um, dirty energy like coal. But also, I guess what I would like to see is not just like getting rid of that because people get upset and they lose jobs, but something where we provide them with an alternative too that's better, because these jobs, they're good jobs in terms of they pay a salary, but they're not high quality jobs. I mean, people get sick doing these types of jobs. I mean, they really affect your lungs and your breathing and everything. So, but yeah, just massive action on climate change. Oh, actually, what I probably really would love to do is like reform the factory farming system. So like get rid of that completely, which would have a huge impact on climate change. And I understand people do want to eat meat. So like changing everything to like more sustainable farms where everything's grass fed. And yeah,
Mhm.
so stop the for you in the US, we have a lot of subsidies for factory farming,
Mm.
for corn and soy, which is what the animals eat. So stopping all of that stuff because it's bad for climate change. It's bad for you too. The meat is lower quality, and with fatty animals like pork, toxins can accumulate in there, which can get you sick.
Mm.
Oh my God, there's so many things. But yeah, I think climate change is the big one. Plastic's another big one too. But if we don't, I mean, the world is going to change regardless of whether we take action or not for climate change. We've already passed that point. So really doing as much as we can to slow it down.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd vote for you. The final question then. We see across the planet, and you touched on it there too, and you mentioned also that, was it 75% of forest elephants declined in 2 decades?
I think it was like between 60 to 70%.
Right. Okay. So quite sharp declines over a fairly short time scale. And that is something that's been observed over hundreds and thousands of different species across the planet. Conservation and wildlife is having a tough time right now. We're largely losing the battle to save the wildlife that's on this planet. What do we as conservationists and wildlife biologists need to do better?
I mean, I think communication is huge. I think, but also, like I mentioned, with the coal jobs, is figuring out what people need and want and replacing that with something that is better for the environment. Honestly, I think so many conservation problems are economic, political problems. They're like with the poaching for elephants, a lot of it is corruption in these countries that, poachers are found and they can just, pay people off and then get away with it. Or, corruption at the ports of entry. But yeah, I think communication, and I think also just like thinking about like from what people want or what people need too. So not just like we need to save the polar bear or tigers because they're cute and beautiful, which I totally agree with. We should, but also like thinking about creative ways to get people to be interested in nature and conservation. So like I mentioned that getting outside and having these close connections with nature are important. So creative ways to get people outside, like how going outside really affects your mental health. So maybe using that as kind of like an indirect way at getting at conservation. But I mean, nature is really healing when it comes to mental health and physical health if you're doing physical activities too. And I think with the communication, this goes along what we were talking about academics, is like being more like normal people, like you said, and that's what I like to do. That's what not using jargon and hearing people where they're coming from too, and understanding what people's values are, because so many scientists think that we just got to show them data. The data will change their minds. And here in the United States, we have graphs that said that climate change is absolutely happening from humans. It's man-made. The scientists all agree, but people still don't believe the data because it doesn't fit with their values. So yeah, these more creative communication messages, and maybe they don't align with our values either. So maybe a lot of scientists tend to not be religious, but maybe to reach people who are very Christian, you can talk about the Bible and how God wants us to protect the earth and things like that. And I know there's some conservation work that Buddhists are doing that is similar, because inherent in Buddhism is not harming nature and being vegetarian and everything. But yeah, I think be willing to like do more interdisciplinary type work and not being so, I don't know, I guess on the ivory tower. In the ivory tower.
We need less ivory in this world, right?
Yeah. More relatable.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I thank you so much for jumping on the podcast, and also for reaching out and making connection. It's been really fun to get to know you. Long may, this connection stay, and good luck with everything that you're doing. You're doing some great work out there, so keep up the good fight. If people want to find out more about you, Dr. Stephanie Schuttler, if we want to find out more about Fancy Scientist, where should we point them? Where should people go?
If you just go to fancyscientist.com, that will give you everything. I'm on all the social media except for Clubhouse, which I don't want to join. Please don't make me join Clubhouse.
I've never even heard of Clubhouse.
There's too much social media. Well, it's like this new thing that you only get private invitations to. And I just joined TikTok, and I can't keep up with TikTok. I have to, it's too much. But
this
yeah, I'm
information.
on a lot of social media. And if you reach out to me, I respond. I'm more than happy to answer your questions.
That's great. That's great. Once again, thank you very much, Stephanie. You take care.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also, please give us a rating or a review, because it really helps us to get in front of more people. Now, if you want our help to get clear and get started and get hired as a professional conservationist, I recommend you enroll in our free online training program, exploring how to get a conservation job. So if you're a student, a job seeker, or a career switcher, you'll learn the golden rule about how to get started, the key mistakes to avoid, and also we'll answer your biggest questions. You can check that out at conservation-careers.com/free. See you soon.